The following account was taken from real testimonies. Names and details have been altered for privacy.
I never planned to be alone that high. The Himalayas are the kind of place that make you feel small even when you're not in danger. But when the weather turns, when the wind starts carrying that thin, metallic smell before a storm, you realize how fragile you really are. It was supposed to be a short climb, 3 days up to a ridge near Langtang, then back down before the snow set in. Simple, safe, that's what I told myself. I wasn't a professional climber, just a traveler chasing silence. The kind of silence you only find above the tree line, where even your own breathing sounds out of place. The first 2 days were perfect. Cold mornings, clear skies, prayer flags snapping in the wind. The trail wound past small stone houses where children waved as I passed. Sometimes I'd stop for tea, thick and sweet, in a tin cup that burned my hands. There's a rhythm to walking in the mountains. Your feet, your breath, your thoughts, they all start to move at the same pace. You stop thinking about where you're going and start noticing how it feels to move. By the second night, I camped near a stream. The water was icy, clear enough to see every pebble on the bottom. I cooked rice and lentils on a small stove, watched the stars bleed through the thin air, and felt that quiet, perfect loneliness that I'd been looking for. The morning it changed. The sky had a strange color, not gray, not blue. Something in between. I packed up quickly. The wind had picked up, and the peaks in the distance were wrapped in mist. A group of local porters passed by, heading down. One of them stopped and said something in Nepali, something about bad sky. He pointed to the clouds, then to the ridge ahead, and shook his head. I smiled, said I'd be fine, but he didn't smile back. That should have been my first warning. It started as a whisper, a thin gust that pulled at the edge of my jacket. Then another, then the white came, soft, small flakes at first. Then a curtain of snow so thick I couldn't see my own footprints behind me. I checked my GPS, signal weak, battery already half gone from the cold. There was no shelter in sight, just endless white slopes and dark shapes of rocks jutting through the snow. Every direction looked the same. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, but uncertainty. There are two kinds of lost: when you don't know where you are, and when you don't know which way is safe anymore. I found a large boulder, sat behind it to block the wind. My gloves were soaked, the zipper on my bag was frozen. I thought about turning back, but I couldn't see where back even was. Then I remembered the stream. If I could find running water, I could follow it down. Down always means life, villages, people, fire, so I started moving again. Each step felt heavier, not just from the snow, but from the noise inside my head. Why didn't I listen to him? Why didn't I stop when I could? After hours of walking, I realized I hadn't heard anything but my own breathing. No birds, no cracking ice, just the dull sound of snow hitting fabric. My watch had stopped working. I didn't know what time it was, or even what day. I found a flat area beside a cluster of rocks and set up my tent. The snow was too deep to dig into, so I anchored it with my trekking poles. Inside, I took off my gloves. My fingers were pale, numb. I rubbed them until they hurt. I melted snow for water, ate a handful of dried fruit, and told myself it was fine. But that night, the wind didn't stop. It screamed through the mountains like something alive. And every few minutes, I felt the ground tremble, like the mountain was shifting in its sleep. When I woke, everything outside was white. Not the soft white of new snow, a blinding, endless white. The world had erased itself overnight. The trail was gone, the stream was gone. Even the rocks I'd camped beside were buried. I stepped out, and the air felt heavier, thinner. That's when I realized my compass needle wasn't moving. It spun slowly in circles, like it didn't know which way north was anymore. I had two options: stay and wait for help that might never come, or move. I chose to move. I packed everything slowly, carefully, then took one last look at where my tent had been. It already looked like no one had ever been there. I picked a direction, not the one that felt right, but the one where the wind seemed weakest. That's something you learn out there. The wind knows where the valleys are. By midday, the clouds thinned just enough to reveal a break in the ridge. Through it, I could see something dark: trees. It's strange how a line of trees can feel like salvation. I started toward them, step by step, knees burning, every muscle screaming. When I reached the first tree, I just leaned against it and laughed. It was a stupid, shaky laugh, half from exhaustion, half from disbelief. The storm was still above me, but below, I could see a faint trail carved into the snow, and far, far away, a thin line of smoke rising from somewhere in the valley. I followed that smoke for hours. My body moved on instinct, my mind was somewhere else. All I could think about was warmth, voices. When I finally reached the edge of the valley, the snow turned to wet mud, the air smelled different, like life again. There was a small hut, built of stone and wood. A man stepped out, wrapped in wool, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. He didn't ask questions. He just guided me inside, set me by a fire, and handed me a bowl of soup. I remember the steam rising, and for the first time in days, I felt my hands again. The hut belonged to a man named George. He spoke little English, but his eyes said enough. Curiosity, relief, and something like quiet understanding. When I tried to thank him, he just smiled and waved his hand. The universal gesture for "you're safe now, don't talk." His wife brought me a thick blanket that smelled of smoke and earth. I sat by the fire, steam rising from my boots, watching drops of melted snow hiss and vanish on the stone floor. The soup was simple: lentils, rice, a few vegetables, but it might as well have been gold. Every spoonful brought me back to myself, back from that endless white world where nothing felt real anymore. I stayed in their hut for 3 days. Outside, the storm still howled across the mountains, but down in the valley it was just rain and wind. George checked my gear one morning, turning things over in his rough hands. He pointed at my map, then at the ridge I'd tried to cross, and said a single word: too soon. I didn't argue. He was right. That ridge wasn't meant to be crossed yet. The weather up there turns without warning. Even the locals wait until it settles. He told me that a rescue team had gone looking for 2 trekkers the week before. They never found them. That silence between us after he said it, I still feel it when I think about the mountain. On the 4th morning, George said the path was open again. He offered to walk me to the lower trail route that would lead back toward Saya-Brubesi. We started before sunrise. The valley was quiet, a soft mist clinging to the trees. I walked slowly, still feeling the fatigue deep in my bones. George walked ahead, never once checking his phone, never using a compass. He just knew where to go. Halfway down, he stopped by a small shrine built into the rock. Colorful flags fluttered around it, their edges frayed from years of wind. He pressed his hands together, whispered something in Nepali, then motioned for me to do the same. I don't know what I was praying for. Maybe gratitude, maybe forgiveness. But I bowed anyway. By the time we reached the main trail, I could hear the river again. That deep, rushing sound that feels alive. George stopped, turned to me, and smiled. "This way," he said, pointing toward the valley. Home. It was the first time he'd used an English word that wasn't about directions or weather. It caught me off guard. Home. I hadn't thought of anywhere as home for a long time. Maybe that was why I kept moving, why I ended up chasing mountains instead of people. I thanked him the only way I could, by offering my gloves. He refused, laughing. Then he handed me a small prayer flag from his pocket. Its fabric worn thin but still bright. "Good for road," he said. I nodded. And then he turned and started back up the hill, his figure growing smaller until it was just a shape against the mist. It took me 2 more days to reach the next village with road access. Every few kilometers, I'd see traces of the storm. Fallen branches, small avalanches, half-buried footprints that led nowhere. But as I descended, the world began to soften again. Children ran along the paths, smoke curled up from chimneys, and that constant, deafening silence of the high mountains was replaced by sound. Real, living sound. When I reached the bus stop at the edge of the valley, a group of trekkers was waiting to go back to Kathmandu. They looked clean, fresh, full of plans. One of them asked me where I'd come from. I pointed toward the mountains. He laughed and said, "You look like you've seen ghosts." I smiled. "No ghosts," I said. "Just weather." Back in the city, the noise felt wrong. Car horns, neon signs, people shouting across the street. All of it felt too loud, too close. I kept touching the prayer flag in my pocket, its edges rough against my fingers. Every time I looked at it, I remembered George's quiet smile, the storm, the cold air that had burned my lungs, and the moment when I thought I might never find my way down. And I realized something Sometimes, the mountain doesn't want to kill you. It just wants you to listen. To stop moving for a moment, to see where you are. And understand that being alive is not the same as being safe. I still hike, still chase ridges and rivers. But I no longer chase silence. I know now that silence doesn't live at the top of the world. It lives in the small things, the sound of a match lighting in a cold hut, the first sip of hot tea after a storm, the word home said by a stranger who means it. When people ask why I kept going after that storm, I tell them the truth. I wasn't running from anything. I was just learning how to stay. For a week, I stayed in a small guest house near Thamel. It was the kind of place where the walls were thin and you could hear the city breathing. Motorbikes, prayer bells, the sound of tourists arguing over prices. At first, I told myself I was just resting, but I knew better. I was hiding. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw white. The endless snow, the shifting light, the way the compass needle spun. Sometimes, I'd wake up gasping, feeling the weight of the air again. Like I was still at altitude. During the day, I wandered the markets. Vendors shouted, children ran barefoot through puddles. And every smell, spice, smoke, dust pulled me back into the world a little more. Still, part of me stayed up there, somewhere between the clouds and the silence. One evening, as the power flickered in and out, I found a photo on my phone I didn't remember taking. It was the ridge before the storm, the sky a pale silver. A single figure in the distance, walking away from the camera. At first, I thought it was Dorj, but he'd never been up that high with me. Maybe another trekker, maybe no one. The timestamp read 11:42 am. The same hour the wind had shifted. I zoomed in, but the figure dissolved into pixels. It didn't matter who it was. What mattered was the feeling it brought back. That quiet before everything changed. Before I left Kathmandu, I wrote Dorj a short note. He didn't have an address. But one of the tea shop owners promised to send it along with the next supply truck heading toward Langtang. I didn't know what to write, really. How do you thank someone for giving you back your life? In the end, I just wrote. The road down was longer than I thought. Thank you for showing me where it began. I slipped the note into an envelope, added the small prayer flag he'd given me, and left it there on the counter. It felt right to send it away. Some things you don't keep, you return them to the mountain. On the flight back, I had the window seat. When the plane lifted above the clouds, the peaks broke through like islands. They looked peaceful from up there, gentle, almost kind. But I knew better. Those ridges held everything I couldn't explain. Fear, humility, and the strange calm that comes when you stop fighting the world. The woman next to me asked if it was my first time in Nepal. I said no, but it felt like it was the first time I'd really seen it. When I got home, the first thing I noticed was the noise. Refrigerators humming, traffic outside. The way people complained about small inconveniences like rain or slow Wi-Fi. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. Because once you've been in a place where silence can crush you, you stop being afraid of noise. You start to see it for what it is. Proof that you're still part of something alive. For a long time, I didn't unpack my gear. The dirt on my boots stayed there for weeks. A small reminder that the world I'd come back to wasn't the only one that mattered. Sometimes, late at night, I'd open the window just to feel the air move. And for a few seconds, I could almost hear the mountain breathing again. Time softens everything, even the mountains. At least, that's what I tell myself now, months passed after I came home. The stories of that storm, the white silence, the way the air itself seemed to judge me. They all started to fade, like snow melting on a window ledge. But something in me stayed changed, not broken, just quieter. I used to think adventure was about chasing distance, about seeing how far I could go before fear stopped me. But in the Himalayas, I learned that fear doesn't live in distance. It lives in stillness, in the moment you realize that no one is coming. And you have to move anyway. One afternoon, I was walking home when the sky turned gray. The kind of gray that looks like it remembers something. The air smelled like snow. I stopped under a tree and just listened. There it was, the same sound I'd heard on the ridge, the whisper of wind against stone. And suddenly, I wasn't scared, just grateful. Grateful for hot soup. For warm blankets. For people like Dorj who ask nothing but give everything. For the way a single step in the right direction can change an entire story. I don't chase silence anymore. I listen for it in places most people ignore. In the seconds before the city wakes up, in the soft creak of a chair. In my own breathing when I finally stop running, because silence isn't emptiness. It's the sound of everything waiting to begin again. And maybe that's what the mountain was trying to tell me. That peace doesn't live at the top of the world. It lives wherever you stop fighting yourself. Sometimes, I still think about the ridge, about the snow swallowing the trail, about how close I came to vanishing into that white world without a trace. But then I remember George's smile, the warmth of his hut, and the way the valley opened up like a second chance. And I realized that I was never trapped in the Himalayas. I was just waiting to come home, to myself.